everyone, thank you for joining us for another episode. Today we have Julie Cook. She is the IBM Head of Learning Development, and she helps organizations transform their talent through learning interventions. So Julie, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be a part of this conversation today.
Oh, thanks, Brian. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
So I should say, at IBM is a very big company, so there are several people. We have a couple different big learning organizations. So I'm one of the heads of one of the learning organizations.
Awesome. So Julie, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you arrive to where you are today?
So I've been in learning and development for, 25 or more years. I don't know if some people might remember DEC, Digital Equipment Corp. That's really dating me, but that goes a while back.
Yeah.
Doing learning and development, doing knowledge management at PeopleSoft, as well as change management there, and then coming into Lotus, and then IBM, always in learning and development. So my degrees are in learning and development and psychology and business, those kinds of things. I'm very, very interested and invested in education at all levels, not just corporate level, but at the public education level, private education, charter school. I homeschooled my daughter for a number of years.
Wow.
So yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So today we're going to have a brief conversation about corporate culture. And just to start the conversation, Julie, what are your thoughts on kind of the root cause or the root trigger of corporate culture? How does it all begin?
Yeah, so it all begins with fear. It begins and ends with fear. So fear causes leaders to not be as transparent with data and information as they should be. When you take fear out of the equation, everybody freely gives of themselves, their information, and there's a flow to an organization. When you have any fear, that usually starts at the top of the organization, that manifests in lack of transparency. And so there's hoarding of information. So if you want to think of it, a family can be looked at as a small organization. And if you, as a parent, are not giving your child age-appropriate information, when they're 8, they should know we're not going right home from school. We're going to grandma's house, and then we're going to take the train home, and I got to do my homework there. If you don't give them enough age-appropriate information, they become fearful and anxious. Their grades decline and all those wonderful things. So an organization is really not that different from a big family. If you don't have transparency of information, data, proactive communication, that's kind of the root cause of bad corporate cultures. And that manifests as fear in employees. So you might not see, hey, there's a lack of transparency, a lack of communication. What you see instead is fear-based behavior at the employee population level. So you will see hoarding of information, self-preservation, allowing coworkers to be thrown under the bus because you're just trying to preserve yourself, resistance to change, lack of ability to give your upper management truthful information because you just want to tell them what they want to hear because you're in self-preservation mode. So I would say it starts as fear and it looks like fear. You just don't know that until you dig under the covers and see what's causing the behaviors.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great perspective. Now, what's the best way to manage that as a consultant, internal, or external? It's always been my perspective that it starts from the top, right? Because it has a lot to do with the systems and processes that govern the organization. What's your perspective on that?
Well, there's a couple ways. You mean like how do you fix it?
Yeah, like how do you? Yeah, if because a lot of times when you have a bad or somewhat of a negative corporate culture, everyone feels it, right? Everyone.
Yeah, right.
But few people take action to actually go and try to repair it. So how do you?
Yeah. Yep. Because people are fearful, so they don't want to take action, and they themselves are hoarding information.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple things you can do. At the individual level, let's say your leadership doesn't want to acknowledge it. Sometimes when you have a negative corporate culture, a corporate culture is a mushy thing.
It is.
Yeah, so it's hard to get your arms around how am I going to tackle it. A lot of organizations think, I just won't tackle it. Instead, I'm going to create all these new shiny initiatives, and that'll give the employees something to rally around.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll forget all that negativity, and we'll focus and we'll move forward together, all in this new direction.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't happen because unless your corporate culture supports your strategic initiatives, the employees won't get on board with them. In fact, if you try to ignore the bad corporate culture and pile on new initiatives, employees have more fear and more angst because they feel like they don't even see what's going on, and now they're expecting me to take this whole new direction, and nobody seems to care that I'm flailing around here. And
Mm-hmm.
that me and my coworkers are throwing each other under the bus, and so you can't really do that. Now, I would say you can do it from the ground up.
Yeah.
It's harder, but you kind of need to head it from both sides, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so the solution is really to first become transparent. From the top down would be best, to have your leadership tell employees what's going on. Give them proactive communication. If you're going to be having a bunch of layoffs, give them notice about it. When they see that the company is laying off 1% of their employees and the other 3% leave of their own accord, top talent, that always happens,
Yep.
and still nothing is said, that creates more fear. So at the top, you've got to be very transparent about what's going on in your organization, why it's happening, how long it's going to continue, what you're doing to make sure that doesn't impact people, and that they're still valued. And that's all got to be very, very transparent. It's hard for leaders to do because a bad corporate culture starts from fearful leaders. So that saying, fake it until you make it.
Mm-hmm.
As a leader, if you really do want to transform your corporate culture, but you yourself are fearful and you don't know how much information to give, you kind of got to fake it and pretend you're okay with transparency and do it. And then it'll start to feel natural to you. As employees, we can do it by being open and honest and taking risks ourselves. So if you want to hoard information because you don't feel secure in your job, or something else is causing you fear, don't do it. Tell people what they need to know. Help everybody in the organization. Be very transparent yourself. And that's a good way. And you can see it in organizations that are very, very large. You'll have groups of people that will give freely of their time, their information, will try to help you.
Yeah.
Even if it means a brain dump,
Mm-hmm.
you would say, God, why'd they give me all that information? That was their whole cachet. That's the reason they're here. Now I know it. But yeah, it's all about employees and the top level management being transparent.
It's for so long, you're absolutely right. Culture has been seen as this mushy thing, right? Until what I've seen, until transformation has to happen, right? There's a
Mhm.
large scale project that immediately requires people to think a certain way, behave a certain way, or do something that's kind of, different from the status quo. And then that at that particular moment, that's when you realize the culture is holding the company back. Um,
Yeah.
in terms of transparency, I think there's a difference between public and private companies because public companies, in my opinion, want or feel like they have to be less transparent because they're somewhat held to a higher standard, and you want to kind of maintain the rumors or the narrative around certain efforts that's happening within the company. In your experience working with different organizations, have you noticed a difference in transparency between public and private, or in your mind, is it the same?
Um, I have not noticed a major difference, to be honest. And it depends on the country too
That's
that
true.
you're operating in. So in the United States, I would say I've not noticed a huge difference in transparency in the public companies that I've worked with. Now, there is a little bit more, there's less fear in the employees of a public company, simply because that's their model. They
Mhm.
have a model that can tend to be more secure depending on the country that you're in. So even with a lack of transparency, there's a certain amount of knowledge that's still known about the secure nature of a person's job when they work for a public company. Um, so the corporate culture doesn't have to be as bad in public due to lack of transparency, I would say.
That's true. That's true. That's true. I know you wanted to share the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Do you want to
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
share that, and I would love for you to share your perspective around that.
So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Abraham Maslow developed this motivational model many, many years ago. And most learning people, most culture people kind of live with this, but also educators live with this. Um, it's basically a pyramid that shows at the individual level, until you have satisfied the lower level goals on the pyramid, you cannot go and move up the pyramid.
Yep.
So at the very bottom of the pyramid, and you can, as an individual, without speaking at a corporate level yet, unless you have access to food and water and you can breathe okay, you're not going to be highly motivated to have great achievements, to problem solve, to be really innovative and creative. You're just focused on food, water, and your basic things. Once you're happy, yep, I got food, I've got water, you move up to safety. Am I physically safe? Is my family safe? Is my job safe? All of these things that can create fear. So the bottom two rungs of the Maslow pyramid are when a person is living in fear.
Yep.
These are the needs they're going to try to focus on, right? So once you feel like, yeah, I've got food, I've got water, I can provide for my family, I'm healthy, my body's safe, my job is safe, you then look at developing positive coworker relationships. Being a great team member, being a great team leader. And then you can move up to the next rung, which is going for great achievements, having the confidence to achieve, to respect others, and to have others respect you. And then that very top rung is self-actualization. And this is where the magic tends to happen for organizations. To be successful as an organization, you want at least 75% of your people living in that top rung so that they can be problem solving, creative, in all of the stuff that you see there in the top rung.
That's
So now, yeah, so then the problem is that when you have a bad corporate culture and people are hanging out in that bottom couple of rungs, and then you put forth an initiative that involves deep problem solving, innovation, creativity, you cannot possibly expect that they're going to jump from those bottom two rungs right on up to the top and give you what you're asking for.
yeah.
You have to, at some point, slow down and say, here's where my people are living, and what's the best that I can do to get them to move up to the top of the pyramid. In some cases, they can trick you. You know, there's a new initiative coming down. It requires that we be creative and innovative. And people may approach that from a position of fear. Well, I better try to, do this because I'm fearful. My employment's not safe. I don't know if I'm going to have long-term food, water because my employment's not safe, whatever. But it's not true creativity and innovation, the kind that comes from trust, which means I can now take risks. For true creativity, innovation, you need trust that allows you to take risks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love this. When we were talking before and you mentioned Maslow's hierarchy, I didn't quite draw the correlation, but I totally see it now in the way that you're articulating this. But you mentioned I love what you said. You mentioned that organization needs at least 75% of their people to be in that self-actualization category. I love that. And, right now, a lot of organizations have maybe a quarterly or an annual engagement survey that goes out, which is a series of questions, but when they look at that dashboard, rarely does it show up like this, right? Where executives can understand, okay, what percentage of people are actually in that self-actualization category where they feel like they can innovate and be creative and just, be their best selves.
That's such a good point, Brian. Like, I never thought about it that way, but in those employee engagement surveys, there almost should be something like this where an employee can rate themselves and say, here's where I think I'm living. Now, whether, there's a lot of controversy around employee engagement surveys. A lot of people don't think they're really anonymous. There's all kinds of problems. So you don't get a lot of truth sometimes in there. And then, especially if you're going to make the survey mandatory, that's even worse. I mean, what you really want to do is put out an employee engagement survey and let people take it if they want to take it. When you go and say, 75% hasn't taken it yet, we need their responses. The most beautiful thing about an employee engagement survey is being able to see what percent isn't even engaged enough to take the survey. That tells you so much right there. Are you now going to force those people to take the survey? They're going to click whatever box is closest to them because you are forcing them to do something that they chose not to do. So the most information I think that can come from an employee engagement survey is what is going on with the people that didn't take it, the people that are not engaged.
Well, you know what? You know what? It's interesting. It's very, very interesting. With employee engagement specifically, I think it does have a strong role in corporate culture. And I think it's okay to require everyone to take the survey if you're able to articulate to everybody what you're trying to do, right? Like we really need
Yeah.
your feedback. We know we're not perfect. We want to leverage this data to improve, right? So
Yeah.
taking this, like articulate the reason behind it. And then I've been a part of several organizations. I've consulted a number of organizations that do action planning.
Yeah.
Right? They do action planning at the team level or department level, but never at the organizational level. Because we know engagement has a role to play in culture, but related to engagement, there's two layers. You got your team layer, right? Like you and your department that you're a part of, but then you got conditions, you got conditions and things happening that's well outside of your control, right? So
Right.
an employee can have a good manager, but but the organization as a whole may be negative for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I see the correlation so clearly now. And if there was a visual like this, you could actually see the percentage of employees that are not at the self-actualization stage, and then problem solve against that, right? Because
Yeah.
that's it's anyway. So yeah, when you mentioned this initially, I didn't get it. I got it now. So I appreciate this part of the conversation. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And so I mean, culture, that's why culture is just so very important, because if you want to move your business, you can push and prod and everything, but you really, at some point, you have to face the music and address your corporate culture.
Mm-hmm.
Once it's doing what you want it to do, then you can start new initiatives and all kinds of fun things.
Yep. Yep. So moving towards the end of the conversation, why do you think every organization should have a chief culture officer?
So here's the deal with that. Um, if the culture of the organization sets the tone and defines how successful you can be as a business, um, I'm just shocked that every medium or large company doesn't have a role like a chief culture officer. Now, recently, last couple years, I have seen some companies um, try to give a little bit of lip service to their care and concern of their corporate culture. And they may create a position called, the VP of culture or the VP of people or leader of people.
Yeah.
But they bury it underneath like HR or operations.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be buried there. It has to be equal to all the other C-level roles. And here, the thing is that role has to go toe to toe with, say, the chief financial officer. They have to be able to say, look, the cost cutting that you want to do, the investments you want to make may have a negative impact on our corporate culture, and here's why, so let's come to compromise. They also have to go toe to toe with the chief human resource officer and say, your retention plans, your hiring plans are not doing all they can to promote the kind of culture we want. In order for that person to have that amount of clout, it can't be buried under one of those organizations. And they have to have the kind of plan. There should be a corporate culture plan that gets worked with the same tenacity as your financial plan, your data integrity plan. And so for that reason, I think don't do it if you're going to bury it under something. In fact, I would say you could have the CEO and then the chief culture officer, and it would make even more sense to have the CHRO, the finance, all of that come out from even under the chief culture officer. But I'm seeing organizations kind of do it the other way around. They know culture is important, but they don't know how important. So they're burying it under different roles that cut off their clout and their authority. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, no, 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 no. I love it. I love it. The beauty of doing these interviews and being attached to a community is the idea that you can leverage, different mindsets, right? Different approaches towards the work. Because I'm listening to you and I'm just like, well, what if an organization made all the executive chief culture officers where all the top line executives were accountable for contributing to corporate culture in their own unique way, right? So
Such a good idea, right? Like you can give the finance officer a culture piece and the HR officer a culture piece and checks and balances with the
yeah, because they
policies
have
is
to because
great.
they have to work as a team anyway. So
Yep.
it's like, okay, as a team, how are we going to take our corporate culture to the next level? Right. And
Yeah.
everybody is like there's so many great ways to go about this to bring it to make it positive. Right. Because
Sure.
it's
Yeah, companies have a lot of options. They can
yes.
do what you said, and everybody can have a piece of culture and an ownership in culture.
Yes,
Um,
yeah, it does, and so the and what uh, I just laugh to myself because normally, I always laugh when someone says, "Oh, we have a culture initiative or we have a culture project." It's not a project. It shouldn't be right. It shouldn't have maybe certain efforts should have a charter or whatever, but going after a culture project all by itself, I think it's kind of pointless. But if you have the top line executives accountable for contributing or taking that corporate culture to the next level, I think that is fostering a shared understanding and a shared way of working. And I think it will produce more
yeah.
positive results than just delegating someone saying, hey, you're going to be the chief culture officer. Because
Yeah.
now you're literally positioning one person to like fight a battle against everybody else versus
Well, right.
that accountability.
Yep. And that person that you put in that role has to be extremely likable across the organization, um, and respectable, right? If
True.
people don't, then your culture initiatives could be shot. So in addition to having somebody who is responsible for the culture of the organization, putting everyone else a little stake in it, with measurements and so forth, is a really good effort. And you're right, I agree. It's not a project. You can have a project that is aimed at improving your culture by X% or so forth, but it's really just an initiative that lives the length of the corporation's life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Julie, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to have this conversation. I think that you highlighted some great insights. And when I share this with the ChangeNerd community, I'll be sure to share those insights. I love the Maslow hierarchy correlation of corporate culture. This whole idea that we just spoke about having a chief culture officer and how to spread those accountabilities. I love that. Thank you so much for your time. Really
Oh,
appreciate it.
yeah. Thanks for the opportunity, Brian.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Have a good day.
All right, you do the same.